On a rainy evening in the bustling heart of Manhattan, the Grand Bellevue Hotel stood as a symbol of elegance and prestige. Its grand chandeliered lobby, polished marble floors, and bustling crowds of sophisticated guests created an ambience of timeless luxury. Among the finely dressed patrons and diligent staff, Kevin stood tall at the entrance, a doorman who carried himself with quiet grace and unshakable professionalism. Kevin was no ordinary doorman. His uniform, always pristine, mirrored the precision with which he performed his duties. At 6 feet tall, with a calm demeanor and a respectful smile, he greeted every guest as if they were the most important person in the room. For him, this role was more than a job. It was a personal journey. Few people knew that Kevin was the son of Richard Bennett, the CEO of the Grand Bellevue Hotel. Yet, he chose to work at the ground level, experiencing the pulse of the business his family had built. It was his way of understanding people and earning their respect, not through privilege but by proving his worth. That evening, as the rain drizzled against the glass doors of the hotel, Kevin remained vigilant at his post. A stream of guests arrived. Each one met with his characteristic courtesy. It was business as usual until a commotion outside the lobby drew his attention. A man, disheveled and exuding an air of misplaced entitlement, stormed toward the entrance. His wrinkled shirt, scuffed shoes, and aggressive stride made him stand out starkly against the refined backdrop of the Grand Bellevue. The man's mutterings grew louder as he approached, his irritation evident. Kevin, ever composed, stepped forward to address him. "Good evening, sir," he said in his warm, steady tone. "We're assisting other guests at the moment. If you could wait just a moment, I'd be happy to help you." The man's reaction was sharp and cutting. "Wait?" he sneered, his voice tinged with indignation. "Do you know who I am? I don't wait for anyone." Kevin stood firm, his expression unchanging. "I understand, sir," he replied, "but we have a process to ensure everyone is served fairly. Please bear with me, and someone will assist you shortly." But the man's hostility only escalated. His voice rose, and his words became sharper, drawing the attention of nearby guests. He stepped closer, his anger boiling over. "You think you can tell me what to do?" he spat venomously. "You're just a doorman. You're nothing." The crowd in the lobby had gone silent, their conversations replaced by the uncomfortable tension of the unfolding scene. Kevin, however, maintained his composure, even as the man's tirade became more personal and demeaning. He had faced similar situations before, moments when his patience and professionalism were tested. But nothing could have prepared him for what happened next. Without warning, the man spat directly in Kevin's face. The vile act was met with audible gasps from the onlookers. A woman covered her mouth in shock, while a security guard near the reception desk began moving toward the entrance. Kevin froze for a moment, not out of fear, but in measured restraint. Slowly, he pulled a pocket square from his blazer and wiped his cheek. His hands trembled slightly, but his voice remained steady. "Sir," Kevin said, locking eyes with the man, "that behavior is unacceptable. I'm going to have to ask you to leave." The man laughed bitterly, his bravado unshaken. "Leave? You can't make me leave. Do you even know who I am?" What the man didn't realize, and what would soon become his most humbling lesson, was that the person he had just insulted and disrespected was far more than a doorman. Kevin, standing tall and composed despite the insult, was about to reveal a truth that would leave the man, and everyone watching, utterly speechless. The tension in the air was palpable as Kevin stood his ground. The lobby had fallen into an eerie silence, all eyes fixed on the unfolding drama. Guests whispered amongst themselves, their disbelief evident. Even as security began to intervene, it was clear this incident was far from over. The revelation that was about to come would not only shock the man but also leave a lasting impression on everyone present, reminding them that respect and dignity are values no one should ever overlook. And that moment, that quiet yet powerful reckoning, was only the beginning of a story that would resonate far beyond the opulent walls of the Grand Bellevue Hotel. The man's laughter echoed through the lobby, sharp and bitter, as though he believed himself untouchable. Guests exchanged uneasy glances, their discomfort evident, But no one dared to intervene. Kevin remained composed, though a flicker of something, disappointment, perhaps, crossed his face. It wasn't the first time he had dealt with someone so consumed by their own ego, but this moment felt different. The weight of so many eyes on him, the collective judgment and curiosity of the crowd, pressed heavily on his shoulders. Behind Kevin, a young bellhop stood frozen, his face a mix of anger and disbelief. Did he really just? The bellhop muttered under his breath, his words trailing off as he glanced nervously toward Kevin. The doorman, however, offered no reaction beyond the calm professionalism he had cultivated over the years. He had learned early on that losing control in moments like these never helped. Kevin's mind briefly drifted to his late mother, who had always taught him the importance of grace under pressure. Never let someone else's ugliness make you forget your own dignity, she'd say whenever he came home upset as a boy. Her words, spoken softly but firmly, echoed now as he stood before the man who had just humiliated him so brazenly. The security guard, Sam, stepped between Kevin and the man. His broad frame and quiet authority immediately shifted the dynamic. "Sir," Sam said evenly, "I'm going to have to ask you to leave. Your behavior is unacceptable, and we won't tolerate this kind of conduct in our hotel." The man turned his glare to Sam, his bravado still intact. "You don't understand who you're talking to," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "I'm a paying guest here. I have a reservation, and I'm not leaving until I get what I came for." Sam's expression didn't waver. "Sir, I'll remind you that while we value all our guests, no one is above our rules. If you refuse to leave, I'll be forced to call the authorities." The man scoffed loudly, his arrogance unshaken. He waved dismissively at Sam, as though the very idea of being escorted out was beneath him. "Do you know how much money I spend in places like this?" he barked. "You should be thanking me for staying here, not threatening to throw me out." As the man's tirade continued, Kevin stood silently, his gaze steady and unreadable. He wasn't waiting for an apology. He knew better than to expect one. But something about this encounter gnawed at him. It wasn't just the man's words or his actions. It was the deeper truth they revealed. This wasn't about one rude guest. It was about a mindset, an entitlement that Kevin had encountered countless times before, but never so blatantly. In the corner of the lobby, a middle-aged woman whispered to her husband, her voice barely audible over the man's shouting. "Why isn't someone doing more to stop him? This is outrageous." Her husband shrugged uncomfortably, clearly unsure of how to respond. Meanwhile, the scene continued to unfold. The man jabbed a finger toward Kevin, his tone growing louder with every word. "You think you're better than me," he spat. "You're just a doorman. You stand out here all day, opening doors for people like me. You don't matter. You're nothing." The words hung in the air like a bitter fog, their venom seeping into the room and silencing any remaining whispers. Kevin felt the sting of that insult, but he refused to let it show. Instead, he drew in a deep breath, his hands clasped tightly in front of him. He wasn't going to give the man the satisfaction of a reaction. Behind him, Richard Bennett watched silently from a distance. The CEO of the Grand Bellevue Hotel had arrived only moments earlier, just in time to witness the tail end of the man's outburst. Richard's sharp eyes took in every detail, the man's disheveled appearance, his aggressive posture, and most importantly, the calm resolve of his son standing firm in the face of such blatant disrespect. Richard had always admired Kevin's ability to remain composed under pressure. It was a trait he himself had struggled to master in his younger years. But now, as he watched Kevin handle the situation with grace, Richard felt a swell of both pride and anger. Pride in his son's strength of character, and anger at the man who had dared to treat him so cruelly. For a moment, Richard debated whether to intervene. He had spent years building the Grand Bellevue's reputation as a place of dignity and respect. Allowing someone like this man to tarnish that reputation, even for a moment, went against everything he stood for. Yet, he also knew Kevin well enough to understand that his son didn't need saving. Kevin had chosen this path for a reason, and Richard wasn't about to undermine that choice by stepping in too soon. The man, oblivious to the silent presence of the hotel's CEO, continued his tirade. He gestured wildly toward the crowd, his voice filled with mockery. "This is what's wrong with people like him," he said, sneering in Kevin's direction. "They don't know their place. They think they can talk back, stand up to people like me. Well, I'll show him who's really in charge." As the man's words echoed through the lobby, Kevin felt a quiet determination settle over him. He wasn't angry, not in the way the man probably expected. Instead, he felt a deep resolve to turn this moment into something meaningful. It wasn't about proving the man wrong or putting him in his place. It was about standing firm in his own truth, no matter how much someone else tried to tear him down. Richard, sensing that the time had come to step forward, began to move toward the center of the lobby. His polished shoes clicked softly against the marble floor, each step deliberate and measured. The crowd parted instinctively as he approached, their eyes widening as they recognized him. "Kevin," Richard said, his voice steady and commanding, "is everything under control here?" Kevin turned to face his father, his expression calm but unmistakably weary. "Yes, sir," he replied, his tone as professional as ever. "I was just about to escort this gentleman outside." The man, who had finally begun to sense that something was amiss, glanced nervously between Kevin and Richard. His earlier confidence wavered as he tried to gauge the situation. Who are you?" he asked, his voice losing its edge. Richard fixed the man with a piercing gaze, his expression unreadable. "I'm Richard Bennett," he said simply, "the CEO of this hotel, and Kevin's father." The room seemed to hold its breath as the weight of Richard's words sank in. The man's face paled, his bravado crumbling under the realization of what he had just done. For the first time since his arrival, he was speechless. But Richard wasn't finished. "What you've just done," he said, his tone firm but measured, "is unacceptable in every possible way. No guest, no matter how much they pay, has the right to treat another human being with such disrespect. And no one in this hotel, whether they're a doorman or a CEO, deserves to be spoken to like that." The man opened his mouth to respond, but no words came. The reality of his actions, and their consequences, had finally caught up with him. The lobby had grown eerily quiet, the weight of the situation pressing down on everyone present. Richard's words hung in the air, sharp and undeniable, leaving no room for excuses or deflection. The man, now visibly flustered, shifted uneasily on his feet. His arrogance had drained away, replaced by a nervous energy as he realized the gravity of his actions. Kevin, standing just a step behind his father, felt a strange mixture of emotions. Part of him appreciated Richard stepping in to support him, but another part felt a familiar tug of discomfort. He had always been determined to carve out his own path, to prove that he was more than just the son of a wealthy hotel magnate. This moment, though necessary, seemed to blur the lines between who Kevin was and who people assumed he should be. The man's voice, now quieter and tinged with desperation, broke the silence. "Mr. Bennett, I didn't realize," he stammered, his words tumbling over each other. "I didn't know he was your son. If I had—" Richard raised a hand to stop him, his expression firm. "It doesn't matter who he is to me. Kevin isn't just my son. He's an employee of this hotel. And more importantly, he's a person deserving of respect, just like anyone else. Your behavior was unacceptable regardless of his connection to me." The man's face reddened, his embarrassment palpable as he struggled to find a response. But Richard wasn't finished. He gestured towards Sam, his movements
who had been
deliberate
standing
as he
nearby,
approached the
ready
man.
to intervene
The
if
crowd
necessary.
watched silently.
"Sam,"
Their
Richard
expressions
said
a
calmly,
mixture of
"please
relief and
escort
lingering
this gentleman
unease.
out.
It
If he
wasn't every
resists,
day that they
notify the
witnessed
authorities."
such a confrontation, especially in a place as upscale and meticulously managed as the Grand Bellevue. As Sam guided the man toward the exit, a quiet murmur rippled through the room. Some guests turned back to their conversations, while others exchanged knowing glances, their curiosity still piqued. Kevin remained still, his mind racing despite his composed exterior. This wasn't how he had wanted things to unfold. He had hoped to handle the situation on his own, to show everyone, including himself, that he didn't need his father to step in and save the day. Yet, as he looked at Richard, he saw a glimmer of something that softened his frustration. There was no trace of arrogance or overreach in his father's expression, only a quiet pride and unwavering support. Later that evening, Kevin found himself alone in the staff lounge, nursing a cup of lukewarm coffee. The events of the day played on a loop in his mind, each moment more vivid than the last. He thought about the man's words, the venom in his tone, and the way he had dismissed Kevin as though he were invisible. It wasn't just the insult that lingered. It was the reminder of how often people like that man assumed they had the right to treat others as less than. The door to the lounge creaked open, and Richard stepped inside, his presence as commanding as ever. He approached Kevin slowly, his hands in his pockets, and took a seat across from him. For a moment, neither of them spoke, the silence stretching out like a fragile thread. "I didn't mean to overstep earlier," Richard said finally, his voice low and sincere. "But when I saw what was happening, I couldn't just stand by." Kevin nodded, staring into his coffee. "I understand," he said quietly, "and I appreciate it. But it's hard, trying to prove that I can handle things on my own when everyone knows who I am." Richard leaned forward, his gaze steady. "You've never needed to prove anything to me, Kevin. I know how capable you are. But the world doesn't always play fair, and sometimes people like that man will test you in ways you don't deserve. It's not about proving yourself to them. It's about staying true to who you are." Kevin looked up, meeting his father's eyes. There was a depth to Richard's words that resonated with him, a reminder that strength didn't always mean facing battles alone. Sometimes it meant allowing others to stand beside you, even if you didn't ask for their help. Outside the lounge, the hotel staff whispered about the incident, their voices carrying snippets of the story. Some praised Kevin's composure, while others marveled at Richard's decisive intervention. The man's actions had left an undeniable mark on the day, sparking conversations about respect, entitlement, and the unspoken hierarchies that so often shaped interactions in places like the Grand Bellevue. As the night wore on, Kevin made his way back to the lobby. The space was quieter now, the earlier tension replaced by a sense of normalcy. Yet, beneath the surface, Kevin could feel the ripples of what had transpired. He glanced at the front desk, where a few guests lingered, their expressions thoughtful as they spoke in hushed tones. One of them, a middle-aged man with a kind smile, approached Kevin hesitantly. "I just wanted to say," the man began, his voice sincere, "what you did today, how you handled yourself, it was impressive. Not everyone could have kept their cool the way you did." Kevin offered a small smile, his gratitude genuine. "Thank you," he said simply. "It means a lot to hear that." As the guests walked away, Kevin felt a renewed sense of purpose. The events of the day had been challenging, but they had also reminded him of why he had chosen this path. Being a doorman wasn't just about opening doors or greeting guests. It was about being a steady presence, a quiet strength in moments of chaos. And while not everyone would see or appreciate that, Kevin knew it was enough for him. The days following the confrontation passed in a blur, but the echoes of what had happened continued to ripple through the Grand Bellevue. Staff members whispered in corners, their voices low but filled with a mixture of pride and concern. Kevin became an unintentional focal point, his calm handling of the incident serving as both inspiration and a reminder of the challenges they all faced daily. Despite the outward return to normalcy, Kevin couldn't shake an uneasy feeling. The man's venomous words played over in his mind, each repetition a sharper jab than the last. There had been a dark, unsettling intensity in his tone, a kind of hatred that didn't simply dissipate after being escorted out of the building. Kevin tried to push it aside, focusing on his duties and leaning on the quiet camaraderie of his coworkers. Yet, no matter how hard he tried, that gnawing sense of unfinished business refused to leave. One evening, as Kevin manned his usual post at the entrance, he noticed a familiar car pulling up. The sleek black vehicle idled for a moment before the window rolled down, revealing the man from that fateful day. His expression was unreadable, but his presence alone sent a chill through Kevin's chest. The man stepped out, his movements deliberate, and adjusted his tie as if he were preparing for something significant. Kevin tensed, his instincts on high alert. He glanced toward the lobby, where Sam stood by the front desk, chatting with a coworker. Catching Kevin's look, Sam's smile faded, and he straightened, ready to intervene if necessary. Kevin took a deep breath and stepped forward, determined not to let fear dictate his actions. The man's eyes locked onto Kevin, his gaze cold and calculating. "I'm here to see Richard Bennett," he announced, his voice devoid of the earlier bravado, but still carrying an unsettling edge. Kevin didn't flinch. "Mr. Bennett isn't available at the moment," he replied evenly. "Is there something I can assist you with?" The man's lips curled into a thin smile. "Oh, I think he'll want to hear what I have to say. Let him know that I'm here to discuss important business." Kevin hesitated, weighing his options. He didn't trust the man, not after everything that had happened, but he also knew he couldn't make decisions based on personal feelings. Keeping his voice steady, he gestured toward the lobby. "You're welcome to wait inside. I'll see if Mr. Bennett is available." The man nodded, his expression inscrutable, and strode into the lobby without another word. Kevin quickly signaled to Sam, who immediately approached, his presence a reassuring anchor in the brewing storm. Together, they watched as the man settled into one of the plush armchairs, his posture exuding confidence. "What do you think he wants?" Sam asked quietly, his tone laced with suspicion. Kevin shook his head. "I don't know, but whatever it is, it can't be good." Moments later, Richard arrived, his sharp suit and composed demeanor as commanding as ever. Kevin caught his father's eye and subtly gestured toward the man. Richard's brows furrowed briefly before he nodded and approached the seated figure. The air in the lobby seemed to thicken, the tension palpable as the two men exchanged greetings. Kevin couldn't hear what was being said, but he watched closely, noting every shift in their expressions and body language. Richard remained calm, his voice measured and deliberate, while the man's demeanor fluctuated between forced charm and barely contained frustration. After several minutes, Richard stood, his expression now unreadable, and motioned for the man to follow him. Together, they disappeared into one of the private meeting rooms, leaving Kevin and Sam to exchange uneasy glances. "I don't like this," Sam muttered, his jaw tight. "That guy gives me bad vibes." Kevin nodded, his mind racing. "Me neither. But if my dad thinks he can handle it, we have to trust him." The minutes dragged by, each one stretching longer than the last. Kevin found himself pacing the lobby, his thoughts spiraling as he tried to piece together what might be happening behind those closed doors. He thought about the man's earlier behavior, the malice in his eyes, and the sense of entitlement that had fueled his actions. Whatever he wanted now, it wasn't going to end easily. Finally, the meeting room door creaked open, and Richard emerged, his face set in a grim mask. The man followed, his expression smug as he adjusted his tie and gave a parting nod to Richard. Without a word, he strode out of the lobby, sparing only a brief, pointed glance at Kevin as he passed. Kevin hurried to his father's side, his concern evident. What happened? What did he want? Richard sighed, running a hand through his hair. "It's complicated," he said, his voice low. "But it's clear that this isn't over." Kevin frowned, his stomach sinking. "What do you mean?" Richard placed a reassuring hand on Kevin's shoulder. "He's trying to stir up trouble, but I won't let him. We'll deal with this together." Kevin nodded, but the weight of his father's words settled heavily on his chest. Whatever storm was brewing, he knew it was only a matter of time before it reached its peak, and when it did, Kevin would need to be ready to face it head-on. As Kevin processed his father's words, the unease in his chest grew heavier. Richard's reassurance helped, but it didn't erase the sense of impending danger. Kevin trusted his father's judgment, but he couldn't shake the feeling that the man's smug departure wasn't the end of this ordeal. There was something deeper, something unseen, lurking beneath the surface. The next few days were unusually tense at the Grand Bellevue. Richard seemed preoccupied, spending long hours in his office and fielding a flurry of phone calls. Kevin noticed his father's normally composed demeanor slip at times, revealing the strain he was under. It wasn't like Richard to keep things from Kevin, especially when it involved the family's reputation and the hotel they had worked so hard to build. One evening, after finishing his shift, Kevin decided to confront his father. He knocked lightly on the office door and stepped inside when Richard's muffled voice called him in. The room was dimly lit, the glow from the desk lamp casting long shadows on the walls. Richard looked up from a stack of documents, his eyes tired but sharp. Is everything okay, Dad? Kevin asked, his voice laced with concern. You've been on edge since that man showed up again. What's really going on? Richard sighed and leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples. Kevin, I didn't want to involve you in this, but I suppose there's no avoiding it now. He gestured for Kevin to sit, his tone grave. The man you dealt with, he isn't just some angry guest. He's connected to a powerful business group, and they've been looking for a way to buy out the Bellevue. Kevin's jaw tightened. Buy us out? Why would they want that? We're not for sale. Richard nodded, a flicker of pride in his eyes. Exactly. But they see our hotel as a key piece in their plans to dominate this area's hospitality scene. When I refused their earlier offers, I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. That man is here to strong-arm us, to intimidate us into giving up what's ours. Kevin's mind raced as the pieces began to fall into place. The man's arrogance, his calculated demeanor, and the thinly veiled threats. It all made sense now. What did he say during your meeting? Kevin asked, his voice low. Richard hesitated, then answered carefully. He implied that if we don't cooperate, they'll start digging into our family's history, our finances, anything they can use to discredit us or make our lives difficult. Kevin felt a surge of anger. That's blackmail. We can't let them get away with this. Richard held up a hand to calm him. I know, son. But we need to be smart about how we handle this. If we escalate things too quickly, it could backfire. Before Kevin could respond, there was a knock at the door. Sam stepped in, his expression serious. Sorry to interrupt, but there's something you both need to see. It's about that man. Richard and Kevin exchanged a glance before following Sam out to the lobby, where a small crowd of staff members had gathered. On the hotel's large television screen, a news broadcast was playing. Kevin's stomach dropped as he saw the man's face appear on the screen, accompanied by a headline that made his blood run cold. High-profile businessmen linked to scandal. The reporter's voice filled the lobby, detailing allegations of corruption, fraud, and unethical business practices tied to the man's company. The report painted a picture of a manipulative and ruthless individual willing to cross any line to achieve his goals. Kevin felt a mix of vindication and dread. While the revelations could weaken the man's position, they also made him more dangerous. A cornered animal was always the most unpredictable. Richard frowned, his mind clearly working through the implications. This could be an opportunity, he murmured. If we can gather enough evidence of his tactics against us, we might be able to expose him further and protect the Bellevue. Kevin nodded, determination hardening in his chest. Then we'll do whatever it takes. He's not going to scare us into submission. As the broadcast continued, another twist unfolded. The reporter revealed that the man wasn't acting alone. He had allies within local government and other influential circles. Kevin's heart sank. This wasn't just a fight against one man. It was a battle against an entire network of power and corruption. The stakes had never been higher. In the days that followed, Kevin and Richard worked tirelessly to fortify their position. They reviewed every document, every contract, ensuring there were no vulnerabilities the man could exploit. Kevin also reached out to old contacts, people who might have insight into the man's dealings. The more they learned, the clearer it became that they were up against a formidable opponent. But they weren't alone. The staff at the Bellevue rallied behind them, united in their determination to protect their home and their legacy. As they dug deeper, Kevin stumbled upon something unexpected, a connection between the man and a long-forgotten piece of the Bellevue's history. Decades ago, before Richard had taken over, the hotel had been involved in a contentious deal with another business group. Kevin couldn't shake the feeling that this connection was the missing piece of the puzzle, the key to understanding why the man was so fixated on their family's hotel. But before Kevin could explore it further, another shockwave hit. Late one night, while reviewing surveillance footage, he noticed something unusual. The man had returned to the hotel, slipping in through a side entrance. He wasn't alone. Two other men accompanied him, their movements deliberate and precise. Kevin's pulse quickened as he realized they weren't there for a casual visit. They were searching for something. Racing to alert his father, Kevin couldn't help but feel the walls closing in. The battle for the Bellevue had taken a darker turn, and the next move could change everything. As Kevin sprinted toward his father's office, his heart pounded in his chest. The weight of the discovery pressed down on him. It wasn't just a business takeover anymore. This was something far more sinister. Richard looked up as Kevin burst into the room, his face etched with urgency. "Dad, he's here," Kevin blurted out. "He brought others. They're searching for something." Richard's expression darkened. Without hesitation, he stood and grabbed the small key to the locked drawer in his desk. He opened it, pulling out a folder Kevin had never seen before. Inside were faded photographs, old letters, and a single piece of paper bearing the Bellevue's original deed. "This is what they're after," Richard said grimly. "The original deed has a clause they don't want us to know about. It guarantees that this land can't be sold without the unanimous consent of the board, and that includes the original investors or their descendants." Kevin frowned. "You mean someone from our family is connected to the original ownership?" Richard nodded. "Your grandfather was one of the founding partners, the man we're dealing with. He's from the group that tried to strong-arm the founders into giving up their shares decades ago. This isn't just about power or money for him. It's about revenge." The gravity of the revelation left Kevin momentarily speechless, but before they could discuss it further, the faint sound of footsteps in the hallway snapped them into action. Richard quickly tucked the folder into a hidden compartment in the desk, and the two of them moved toward the door. They stepped out just in time to see the man and his associates entering a nearby storage room. Kevin and Richard followed silently, sticking to the shadows. The storage room was dimly lit, and the intruders seemed to be rifling through old files and boxes, their movements hurried and agitated. Kevin clenched his fists, anger boiling in his veins. But before he could confront them, Richard placed a hand on his shoulder, shaking his head. "We need to catch them in the act," Richard whispered. "Let's call security." Kevin nodded and stepped back to make the call. Within minutes, the hotel's security team arrived, surrounding the storage room. The man and his associates froze as the lights were turned on, illuminating their shocked faces. Richard stepped forward, his voice calm but firm. "You've crossed a line," he said. "Breaking and entering, that's a serious offense. I've tolerated your harassment long enough, but this ends now." The man's smug demeanor wavered, but he quickly regained his composure. "You think you've won," he sneered. "You have no idea who you're dealing with. This hotel will be mine, one way or another." Richard shook his head. "Not anymore. We have the evidence we need to expose your tactics, and the media's already digging into your past. It's over." As security escorted the intruders out, Kevin felt a rush of relief, but it was short-lived. Something about the man's parting words gnawed at him. There was a finality to his tone, but also a hint of something unresolved. It wasn't until later that night, as Kevin revisited the folder his father had shown him, that the truth began to surface. Among the old letters was one written by Kevin's grandfather, addressed to his descendants. It detailed a secret agreement between the original founders, an agreement that hadn't been recorded in the official deed. According to the letter, the Bellevue wasn't just a hotel, it was a safe haven, a sanctuary meant to protect its employees and guests from exploitation and harm. Selling the hotel to anyone who didn't uphold those values would break the founders' promise. Kevin's heart sank as he realized the man's real motive. He wasn't just after the hotel. He wanted to destroy its legacy, to erase the very principles it stood for. But as Kevin shared the letter with his father, they both knew what they had to do. The next morning, Richard called a press conference. In front of a packed room of reporters and cameras, he shared the history of the Bellevue and the recent attempts to undermine it. He revealed the original deed and the letter from Kevin's grandfather, painting a powerful picture of resilience and integrity. The story captured the public's attention, and support poured in from all sides. But the final twist came when an unexpected ally emerged, a former associate of the man, who provided damning evidence of his illegal activities. The information not only cleared the Bellevue of any potential threats, but also led to the man's downfall. As the legal battles played out, it became clear that the Bellevue's legacy was safe. In the end, Kevin stood in the lobby, watching as guests checked in and staff moved about with renewed energy. The Bellevue had weathered the storm, and its future was brighter than ever. But as Kevin turned to his father, he couldn't help but wonder what other secrets the hotel might hold, and whether their fight to protect it was truly over.